Many times organizations are considering whether to build or buy a solution for preference management, and the reality is that there are considerations for both.
There are critical features and functions that a preference management solution needs to include. One thing to consider in a preference management solution is it must incorporate all the business units and functions within the company.
Right, and when you have that, it gives you the ability to effectively engage with a customer and deliver the communications they're looking for.
I'd say the added benefit there is when this data is shared across the organization, it creates a more seamless customer experience because that profile is managed persistently, meaning we don't forget who that customer is and what information they shared about themselves.
It's really important that you plan to capture preferences across the entire spectrum of the customer engagement.
Mm-hmm. You know, I would say that's before a person's a customer as well for those prospect engagement opportunities. But with every big enterprise that we're working with, there are multiple touch points that exist today, online and offline, emerging and traditional channels.
And it's also just not the easy ones, it's the other channels, the social, mobile, kiosk, call centers, all those other touch points in the customer ecosystem.
Historically, many organizations have managed preference data in silos. Those might be driven by business units, products, communication channels, or technology, but it's important that all that data is brought together in a single place so we have a single view of those preferences.
And available in a real-time format, so it can be shared across the enterprise.
Mm-hmm. And not just across the enterprise, such as in call centers, but also your third-party vendors that are using that data. So the data that you send out, they're going to use that and then take the feedback and bring that back into the central repository so everybody has an updated view. A well-designed preference management solution will take into account new technologies as you bring them on board, or maybe even switch out an older technology for a new system.
I think the key idea there is future-proofing the solution. So inevitably change is going to happen, whether that's driven by customer expectations or regulatory requirements, but new technology as well. People onboard new fulfillment providers, automation platforms, CRM tools. It's important to be able to adapt to that.
Right, and it's important that the solution is flexible and adaptable so you don't have a time bomb situation where something, becomes a forklift upgrade. Every business is a bit different, and you need a platform that's configurable and flexible to adapt to those business requirements.
I think the key is to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach to the way that you tackle preference management. Because every business is different, there are complexities that might be driven by an organizational structure, data hierarchy and the way that it's managed, and business logic that you apply as well.
Right, and we want to make sure that you don't limit yourself to any set of collection points. You want to leave that open. You want to make sure that you can distribute and share that information without any limitations, and also the underlying data itself. You want to be able to use that in whichever way the business wants to consume. For instance, account communications versus privacy communications versus marketing communications.
Regulatory compliance as it relates to direct marketing legislation and consumer privacy is also increasingly important and a tedious task for marketers to undertake. There are rules, laws, regulations at a global level, but at a federal and state level as well that are constantly changing.
Right, and they're no longer an option, and severe penalties and fines exist, as well as the loss of brand equity or consumer confidence.
And with so much at stake, you really want to make sure that your systems capture that information as those changes are made. So for instance, who made the change, where did they make it, when did they make it, what compliance language did they see or were subject to during that change.
Enterprise preference management affects multiple organizations in the enterprise: IT, legal, compliance, call center operations, and marketing.
Right, and with that, with all those different groups to help foster that buy-in, there's often an education process you go through. So what is preference management? What are the key terms, the concepts? What's it going to be? And how's the enterprise going to use that?
I've seen clients have success in establishing a steering committee that has representation from all those cross-functional groups, all those areas that you talked about, that considers that there's different value that each of those realizes through implementing preference management and then tying success metrics to those value drivers as well. I think it's important to call out that preference management, the project to get it in place, is not a one-time deal. It's not a set it and forget it type of an implementation. Preference management is a strategy that requires change over time as customer expectations shift, as there are new technologies and communication channels that companies are able to adapt to that.
Yeah, I agree. It's an ongoing effort. You have to maintain compliancy, regulatory awareness. You have to manage and change channels, perhaps. It's an organic thing that needs to be maintained moving forward.
Absolutely, and when you look at the fundamental DNA shift to being that customer engagement platform, it can be complex, and we've seen in some cases when companies have tried to take this on that it can be a very long time horizon before they receive value, and it can be very costly, sometimes reaching into the multi-millions of dollars.
Now, I agree that this is a fundamental shift to a big company's business and the way that they operate. The reality is that it's not their core business, though. There are a lot of complexities that come in, and those are reasons why it makes sense to engage a third party. When we consider that enterprise preference management is the strategy, it's a big undertaking. I think about other projects that I hear customers considering along those lines too. One of those that comes up quite often is this concept of a single unique identifier or a one identity type of project. And I think many people think in order to centralize preferences and make those actionable, they have to complete that other task first. And the reality is that's just not true. It's not a requirement that you have a single ID in order to manage preferences per system.
Absolutely, and in fact, the preference management initiative often leads into helping with a common ID project.